makes use of assertive questioning. Let's say you've been teaching students about nails and screws, right? When you use one and when you use the other, and what the relative advantages and disadvantages are, and so on. You can then use a teaching method called hypothesis testing. And what that involves is giving them a statement which is part true, part false. So in this case, it might be screws are better than nails. Now, sometimes nails are better than screws because you can bang them in faster and they're cheaper. But you don't tell them that. You know, they should be able to work that out from what you've told them already. So after you've taught them about nails and screws, you say, there's your statement, screws are better than nails. Get a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and to the extent, think of reasons why you agree with that, yeah, and put those in the agree column. And if you disagree with the statement for some reason, write that in on the disagree level. So the students do that by themselves, okay? And you can do this at any academic level. So you might give them a statement like Cromwell's motivation was religious, you know, partly true, partly not. Or you might give them a marketing plan for a small hotel. And you say, this is a perfect marketing plan for this small hotel, this scenario. But it isn't. You know, there's bits wrong with it. So you give them something to evaluate, a statement or a policy or something like that. And then the students, to begin with, we have what's called snowballing. The students do it by themselves first. So you've got each student's got their little agree-disagree thing, yeah? And then they fill it in. And then once they've finished, they get together in pairs, and they look at each other's ideas, and they try to meld them into a perfect answer. And then, if you want, you can get the pairs to pair up into a foursome. And again, they can look at each other's lists of agree and disagree, and draw up the best possible answer from that. Then, you use assertive questioning. So you turn to the first group and you say, okay, give us one reason why you agree that screws are better than nails, or whatever. Get an idea, and then I turn to the rest and I say, do you agree with that one? And let's say everybody does, because probably you're going to get very similar answers here. Okay, so I say, I'll write that up then. And you're the scribe for the class, and you just write things up they agree with. Another group says something about why they agree with screws being better than nails. They say something that's not quite right. And you say, do you all agree with that? And they all do, and you just write it up. But you remember that they haven't quite got that one, that needs a bit of fixing. They haven't thought about galvanised nails or whatever it would be. And you go around and collect all the ideas from all the foursomes of why they agree, and you collect the ideas about why they disagree. Each time saying, do you all agree with that one? Do you want me to write that one up? And if the whole class think, yes, that's a reason to disagree, you write it up. And then you've got the class's agreed sort of response to the task of evaluating the hypothesis or the marketing plan or whatever it was. And you can say, well, you're absolutely spot on with this one, this one, and this one, but let's talk about this one, shall we? And again, what you've done is you've used the activity to look inside their heads to see how they've conceptualized what you've taught. You've found errors, you've found omissions in their learning, and you've corrected it by that process. And the assertive questioning means you get 100% perfect feedback on what they think and what they don't think and why they think it. So that's hypothesis testing. All you need is a statement or a policy or something that's partly true and partly false, preferably about 50-50 if you can manage it. And it's called hypothesis testing because the statement like screws are better than nails is a hypothesis. It's, it's a statement made, that needs to be evaluated as to whether it's true or not. So, 30 seconds, could you make use of hypothesis testing, which makes use itself of assertive questioning? Just give you a minute, half a minute. I'm skidding through these very quickly just to give you a taste for which ones may or may not suit you. It'll be worth your while getting the detailed handouts, or preferably book, really, to make sure you can read about the methods in detail if you're going to use them, because there's a lot of tricks in the, that teachers have worked out about each of these methods that can help you. But let's just have a look at one other, which has come out exceptionally high in these trials of teaching methods, and that's graphic organisers. And sorry about the jargon, but I'm sticking with it for reasons which will become apparent, possibly, if we have time anyway. The way it works is this. You know, mind maps or flow diagrams. I think most of you will be familiar with at least one of those two. Let's say, I know you're mainly vocational teachers, but one vocation is a bit of a mystery to another vocation. So I want something that's common ground, and I think we've all studied history at some time or other. So let's suppose I'm a history teacher, and I'm teaching my class about the causes of the Second World War, yeah? And I say to them, having taught them what caused the Second World War, I say to them, here's a sheet of A3 paper, right? So that's twice as big as A4. I want you to draw a flow diagram that summarises what we've just said about what caused the Second World War, all the things that were going on. And so each student has their own flow diagram, and they create their flow diagram to summarise what you've just taught them. And when they're nearly finished, they leave their diagram on their, in their place, and they get up and they look at everybody else's diagram. And the purpose of this is to discover whether there's anything you can do to improve your own diagram. Okay? So each student wanders around and looks at everybody else's and says, oh, that's a good idea, I could do that on mine. I really like the way she's phrased that. That's much better than the way I've done it. And then they go back and they improve their diagram. Yeah? When they've finished improving their diagram, the teacher puts either assessment criteria or puts their own diagram, possibly, on the screen. And the students now look at what they should have done, look at what they did do, and see the difference, and then improve it again. And again, you can see what's happening here. The teaching method is finding what's missing in the student's understanding, what they've got wrong, and it's getting them to correct it. When that process is done, they'll have gone around that cycle that we talked about a couple of times, won't they? They'll have improved it when they'll have improved their diagrams when they looked at their peers, and they'll improve them again when they look at your mind map or your assessment criteria. And that's raised students' performance by 2 grades as well when it's done well. So it's very, very powerful. However, most people just think there's mind maps and flow diagrams, and they don't realise there are a lot of other ways of organising information and displaying it graphically, like a flow diagram does, isn't it? A flow diagram organises information and then displays that organisation of the information in a visual or a graphical way. And something that does that is called a graphic organiser. It does what it says on the can, it organises things in a graphical way. Let's have a look at a few. There are 3 sorts of graphic organiser, and there's the white pack. If you've got a handout on your table you can get hold of. Pages 12, 13 and 14 have got a whole lot of examples. One thing that graphic organisers can do is to describe. A mind map can do that. It can describe a concept by cutting it up into bits and showing you the bits. But some graphic organisers compare 2 things. And that's more useful than you think. And some show a sequence or a cause and effect, like a flow diagram does. Here are some of the less well-known graphic organisers. A description table. You cut something up into bits, or you look at it in 5 different ways or 4 different ways, and then you write a little bit about each way. It's a very, very simple idea, but it's forcing the student to write about each part or each way of looking at something. A Venn diagram, a circle or a similar closed shape, anything that's an example inside. Something that's not an example is outside. So this is hot air rising, and a hot air balloon is an example of that, so that's inside. But heat travelling through a wall isn't hot air rising at all, so it's outside. True statements inside, not statements that are incorrect outside. So that's a Venn diagram. It's a wonderful way of capturing a concept. Because to understand a concept, you need to know what it means, but you also need to know what it doesn't mean, what isn't an example of that concept. Otherwise you can sometimes think it's a bigger concept than it really is. As well as describing things, which are all, there's a number of others as well on page 12, but on page 13 there are a lot of ways of comparing things. And those Venn diagrams I was describing can also compare two things with overlapping, perhaps, Venn diagrams. So here are teachers looking at health and fitness, and what things are only to do with health, what are only to do with fitness, and what are to do with both. And also, interestingly, what some people think are to do with health and fitness, but actually they're not to do with either. That's a misconception. So that would be outside of all. So this is a way of organising information in a graphical way. It's a graphic organiser. And if the students create this graphic, after you've taught them about health and fitness and what they have in common and what they don't, once you've taught that, you can say, okay, create a same and different diagram. The students create it, they get up, they look at each other's, they come back, they improve it, you show yours, they improve theirs again. It gives them a really strong conception of what we mean by health and fitness and what the difference is between them. Comparison table. You can compare, this one happens to compare, Russia before the communist revolution, which is called Tsarist Russia, with Russia after the communist revolution, which is Soviet communist Russia. And here are some criteria, life of the peasant, what was that like, before, after, what was economic development like, before, after, and you could compare, say, 4 computer printers that way, couldn't you? So instead of 2 things here, we could have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you could have criteria along here, like how fast does it print, will it print on both sides, how expensive is it, blah, blah, blah. So a whole lot of criteria down here, and each printer can be compared, you can get a score, or you can get a comment, or a price, or whatever happens to be appropriate. That's a comparison table, brilliant for evaluating things, and so on. These are all graphic organisers. These are all ways of showing something in a visual way. And they're described in more detail in the handout. But remember, the way to get the high performance from graphic organisers is, first of all, you probably need to teach your students how to make the more complicated ones. So, for example, this one's quite complicated. So why not get them to do a mind map for health, a mind map for fitness, and then do a same and different diagram for health and fitness. That will help them to sort of conceptualise health and fitness separately before they put it together. Otherwise it's really quite hard. These things really make students think. You might think they're just sort of primary school, but actually they're not. They're very deep and difficult, and they really make students think in a very deep way about what they're learning. So sometimes you need to creep up on these. You don't just do them in one unless the students are very familiar with them. So that's graphic organisers. Call that because they're organisers, which they organise information in a graphical way. Could you make use of that as a teaching strategy? It's another 2-grade leap job. It's one of the very, very few teaching methods that, compared to conventional practice, will raise students' performance by 2 grades. You're turning C's into A's here with your students. So, could you make use of it? I'll just give you a minute or two. Okay?